Hi, welcome to Austin Faith Dialogue. We're told that weddings are to be one of the happiest moments in our lives, but in reality, as you know, weddings are oftentimes of stress and concern and family involvement and misunderstandings. On Austin Faith Dialogue today, we want to talk about weddings. You may have heard the story about the usher was passing the offering basket at a large church wedding, and one of the guests looked at the usher with a puzzled look, and then the usher said, "I know it's strange, but the father of the bride requested it." That's kind of the way it is with weddings. Fathers of the bride say, "What is my role in all of this? Pay the bills." Well, today we're going to talk about weddings and where the father of the bride and the groom and where they all fit together, and also where the faith community fits into the wedding experience. And we have three of our guests here with us at Austin Faith Dialogue who've had the experience of working with couples as they have planned and celebrated their weddings. Murray Powell is vicar of one of our Episcopal congregations here in the Austin community, and Mary Gaines serves one of our Presbyterian congregations here in Austin, and Jose Luis Ayala is involved in a Lutheran Spanish mission work here in the Austin community and has also done it on the coast of Texas. We welcome the three of you and glad to have you all here. Let's have a good time and talk about weddings, because they really are fun. I think for me, all the weddings I've had, most all of them, have been a pretty good time. What are some of the interesting experiences, Murray, that you've had with weddings?
Oh, I've been doing weddings for, 15 years now, and each one is like giving birth is different.
Mm-hmm.
Couples so nervous about the wedding that I think the interesting thing that I've seen across the board is my fear is they've lost sight of the marriage at times.
Mm-hmm.
And looking, I think if you say interesting, I think you mean funny. Probably the best one was when the bride fainted as well. I was giving the final blessing. Had to hold her by the shoulder instead of giving the sign of the cross. And I feared that if I did that by giving the sign, that she would fall into me. But I think Mary's got a better story, though, with hers.
Mary, what kind of interesting experiences have you had with weddings?
Well, I've had a number of them, but I think my favorite one was the very first wedding when I had just become ordained and was in a church in McAllen, Texas, Presbyterian, and this elderly couple came up to me after worship and asked me if I would marry them, and I really thought they thought I was a secretary and was asking for the senior pastor. But when it all got straightened out, I realized I had to counsel them and all of that. But it took place just a few days later, and we had only 2 attendants, and there was no one else there. So I gathered them around the communion table, and as I started the service, the groom began to cry, and just tears just rained down, and he was not able to say anything through the wedding, and I was really, in a sense, saying his vows, and I began to get nervous that maybe I would end up marrying the bride instead of him. So finally I asked, can you say "I do" at least? And he took a big breath and sobbed out, "I do." And later they told me that they had both in their previous marriages only had justice of the peace type marriages, and this was so beautiful being in the church. And then they would come back every year as Winter Texans to report on their marriage to me. So that was probably the most special of them all.
And we want to pursue that idea of having weddings within the faith community and the context of the faith community, because weddings can take place inside a church building or inside a synagogue. They can take place inside a mosque, I would imagine, and they can also take place outside. And we've had weddings in a variety of places. But Jose Luis, down in the valley in your work there, what is an interesting story of an experience you've had with a wedding?
Well, I guess I haven't had that much experience in weddings, but I guess one of the times I was had some problems getting back to church because car problems, and anyway, that night before we hadn't slept very good, and when the time came for the interchange of the rings, I forgot, and I just kept on going until I think it was the bride's groom that just signed at me and said, "Well, what do I do with this ring?" So I had to go back and tell everybody, "Well, would you please be seated for another 5 minutes till we finish this off?"
That would be an interesting experience. One of my interesting experiences was when I first came to this parish in Austin, and I really want to make an impression on the first wedding I was going to have. And I recall meeting with that couple and going through all the things. We're going to make this the perfect wedding. And right in the middle of the liturgy, as they're standing up there at the altar, part of the altar railing fell down.
Oh, God.
And it landed as a big chunk of wood, from the altar railing, and it landed on that marble that we have up there. And it sounded to me like a slap of thunder, you know, and I thought everybody heard it. And afterwards, I asked people, you know, did they notice something went wrong? And people were so good. And that's what I think happens so frequently, is that, that people say things that are affirmative about weddings because people enjoy weddings and enjoy the celebration of weddings. But there is a process that people go through in order to have a wedding. If they choose not to go to a JP, if they choose to come to a church or to a synagogue, they're going to talk to a person like one of you. What is the process, Murray, in your tradition that people go through in order to be married in your congregation and maybe other examples in your tradition?
Well, my assumption will be that it's a member of our church family. If it's someone that I know and have a relationship with already. If I don't, I say that if they want to be married there, they need to start coming to church.
Mm-hmm.
Because what the Episcopal Church is now beginning to risk is a sense of a seriousness about the vows which we will ask God to bless.
Mm-hmm.
And the relationship isn't full-blown and full bloom, and we want to be part of this nurturing of this relationship. To do that, a couple would need to come to me at least by our canon laws 60 days prior to their wedding and announce to me that they want to get married, and hopefully they don't have a date picked. That I only had this happen once, but a couple came and said, we think we want to get married. And we went through a process, and then after that, we picked a date. That was a very special time for me.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, if the couple has the date, I say it's a clear calendar date or not. And we were required to have, by our laws, 3 premarital counseling sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, we are trying to help them to perceive what the church has to say about marriage, and also to look at each other with a different way of seeing each other, saying that this is a lifelong engagement. Mm-hmm. And the wedding is not the graduation. It is a milestone in their decision to become committed to each other.
A part of the process.
That's right.
I hear you saying then that if they're going to be married by you and your particular congregation, that they would be a part of the congregation, at least one of them would be a member of the parish?
We are required that one of the couple be a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I require that one of them be an Episcopalian who is a part of the family of St. John's.
Mm-hmm.
We can't support them if they're not there.
Right.
And if they do have a relationship with another church, then I'll be glad to participate in their wedding. But I want them to have a family that supports them and surrounds them with examples of relationships.
A community of believers around them.
That's right.
Yeah. Mary, what about you? In your tradition, Presbyterian tradition, what are some of the things that you're trying to say as you lead a wedding service? What's the process for people as they come to you and ask to be married by you?
Well, it's very similar to Murray's, but we don't have a stricter rule, so I think each Presbyterian minister makes the decision for himself or herself. And mine is that I always want to explore at first who the couple is and what they're seeking out, especially if they're not members of the congregation. Why have they called up and asked me? Mm-hmm. And I won't do it unless I can counsel with them at least a minimum of 3 times, and I prefer 6 or 7 times.
Wow.
Again, to really work with the whole area of marriage so that they at least focus on what are the issues, whether it's finances or in-law problems or how they will relate as parents to children, you know, to try to go over all of that with them. And I try to stress that they can go to the justice of the peace, that what they're asking when they come to the church is God's blessing and the church's blessing, and that they're taking a vow within that community. And again, it is an act to the Christian community. So like what Murray's saying, that that they have a supportive community. And recently I was involved with a wedding a few months back that the couple were not members, but because we did reach out and take time with them, they were married and have become active members of the church. Mm-hmm. So I guess I try to be a little bit more open and say, well, is God leading me to this couple before I say, you know, an automatic no. But
I have rules that are made to be broken.
Yeah, and I figured you probably did. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting thing for you to say then. Yeah. Then some of those rules could be broken. For instance, if a couple came and they are broken. Mm-hmm. What about the 60 days? Is that something that can be broken?
Oh, sure.
Oh,
I think
we're having
that,
confessions here, all right.
Yeah, what I didn't say was that another rule is that if the couple have had a divorce in their past, then I am required by the Episcopal Church in the Diocese of Texas, to seek the permission of our bishop. And again, that is a way not for us to be arrogant, but for us to stress the seriousness of marriage.
Well, I would like
And
to
the
pursue that a
difficulty
little
of
bit.
it.
What about the fact that we have more and more divorces in our society, in our culture? Then you have these second marriages. Do you see an increase in people coming to you who are being married for the second time?
Oh, yes. And I see older persons coming for their first marriage. I know that in the last 5 years anyway, I have not been with a couple who are younger than 29 or 30.
Jose Luis, what about some of the experiences you have in the process? When you were performing these in the Valley, these weddings, what were some of the stipulations that you had or guidelines that you followed for couples who were going to come to you?
Well, they're very similar to both colleagues here, and it was also 2 months, 60 days. We met once every week for about an hour or so. We talked about marriage, about their decision, about the wedding itself, about their finances, where they were going to live, family, and just try to cover every aspect of it. I think the only experience that I had not marrying somebody that belonged to the church was once. And all that previous counseling helped very much to where the couple felt like, you know, they belonged to that group. There was somebody there that cared for them, and I guess my experience was similar to yours. They became members of the church, and you know, they were there.
Yeah, a way to give them some support. You brought along some symbols, and I want to share this with the viewing audience so they can see. This is, well, tell us what it is.
Okay, this we call a lazo, and it's to put around the couple at the end. When they kneel for the final blessing, it's put around them by the family, usually by the parents or friends. And there's one important thing. One is the color. It represents purity, honesty. And the other thing, and there's a cross here in the middle, which represents God being in the center of their lives and offering themselves to God. And also, it represents unity. They're uniting their lives with God to one another.
I like this because it also says they are still separate people.
That's right.
And it's a joining. It is a union and not a taking over.
That's right.
And I appreciate that.
Right.
That's
They,
correct.
even though they are unified in their faith in God, there's also that separate personhood they have,
That's right.
and that needs to be cared for.
And I guess also the idea of being equal, not one over the other, or not one and
Yeah,
you
the
know,
identical
yes,
side.
that's
Yeah.
right.
You also had something else, and let me share
Yes,
these.
these are some small coins. I just brought 4. They're usually more than that.
Show
But
these up.
these are given during the ceremony, after the ring, and as the groom puts them in the bride's hand, he expresses and says that these tokens represent the care that he will have, that all the things that are necessary in their home, for their marriage, for their kids, for their family, he takes the responsibility of providing. And she responds, and the bride responds and says, well, I accept them, and I will diligently be careful with the things of our home and make sure they're well administered.
Well, there seems to be a lot of symbolism.
Yes.
The lasso, the coins, you mentioned forgetting the rings, the sharing of the rings. Those are all symbols that are part of the liturgy, of the worship service that people have, and every culture maybe develops their own symbols. Now, what about some changes? Mary, right beside you, there's a symbol there, and maybe you'd pick that up and hold it, and and see if the viewing audience we can get a camera shot on that. This is what they call a unity candle. Mary, have you had the experience of a unity candle?
Well, it's been a while, but usually there's two other candles here, and the bride and groom, and they're lit, and the bride and groom come up and each takes a candle, and together they light this candle, if I remember correctly. It's been a few years since I've used one.
That's correct.
But again, it's just a symbol of being united.
Have you ever had that experience, Jose Luis?
Yes.
Murray, what about you?
Well, what we have is the Paschal candle, which is the Christ candle, candle right before Easter. And again, it's not the church, it's not the couple's candle, it's the church's candle.
Right.
And they participate within the light of Christ as expressed to the church.
Right. I've had this experience, and this is one of my interesting experiences, that the couple came to light the candle, and it wouldn't light. and I said, it will light. You know, a very pastoral decision. This candle is going to light. And this is God's truth. I went out, and it would not light. That candle would not light. And that humbled me, you know, that this is one symbol that was not going to cooperate with us when we're going to have it. The other thing, and Murray, you made this point, of these two candles for the bride and groom to take to light. Some couples I've seen, they'll take and they'll blow them out. And I always ask the couples, do not do that.
Right,
Because it seems to me, just the point you made with the lasso, that the candle needs to stay lighted so that it can symbolize that their personhood is still intact. What are some of the changes? That's really important to us. What are some of the changes that you've seen happening? We mentioned, what about interfaith marriages? Do you have that happen, that experience happen to you in the pluralistic society we live in? Do you have people of different faith backgrounds coming and asking to be married?
More often than not, it's a person who is a member of the church with someone who's not. And again, the changes have come about because of the society, as you said, the pluralism, but the loss of community. We no longer know where we belong. And again, my hope is that with the Episcopal Church and others, that we can really begin to emphasize the need to relieve couples of the responsibility of thinking they are all prepared to do this and they know everything. And they, in my premarital counseling, I stress, let's come back in 6 months after the wedding, and when you know more about some of the questions, because they come in thinking they know the answers and they're so quickly disappointed. And in my trying to maintain the traditions which have been in the Episcopal Church and Christianity for so long, I don't feel the need to change them, but for us to live up to them and to explore them.
You emphasize, well, I hear all of you saying this, you emphasize worship, that a wedding, marriage, celebration is a worship experience.
Thank you. Yes.
It is that. For you. It needs to be that for you. The community gathers together for worship. We also have oftentimes wedding bulletins. Some couples want that type of experience, and we have some samples of wedding bulletins that we're going to look at. But what about that experience? When you work, do you work out a liturgy with the couple, Mary? Do they sit down and go through the steps, or do you have an order you follow?
Well, we do not have one set order, and we've just recently gotten a supplemental liturgical resource with some new wedding orders. But I usually let them look at 2 or 3 and look at the old one, Dearly Beloved, we are gathered here, and walk through the services with them and talk with them what each one means, and then let them pick a service. But where I really try to involve them is talking about scripture passages. And I give them a number of them to take home with them and read, and then they come back and tell me which one has really caught their eye, or 2 of them, and we talk about the meaning. And so I try to involve them in that way. I try to encourage them to use the liturgy of the church, because again, it is the wedding of the church as well as theirs. But now, in a wedding I did last week, the father of the groom asked if he could give the prayer for the couple afterwards, and I felt that was very appropriate, and it, you know, was delighted to have him do that.
Do you find if you have a wedding bulletin, do you find that lends more of an atmosphere of worship to?
I think it does, and more in the Presbyterian Church, it is becoming a worship service with hymns being sung, with a sermon being given. It's usually a brief one, not a lengthy one. Sometimes I even have the bride and groom sit down. Now more and more you're seeing the wedding follow the 11 o'clock worship on Sunday morning.
How interesting.
And it's just a part of the worship life of the church.
Again, emphasizing the whole idea of community. And that maybe would take some of the stress off that we talked about early on in the program, the stress that the parents, the father of the bride, that they have to carry all the responsibility, or the bride getting to the place where she might feel that she has to faint, or that she just knows she's going to faint. What about you told us before the program about the service you had recently with the signing of the service.
Well, last weekend, my sister's daughter was married, so this was very special. It was my niece's wedding, but the whole family is deaf on both sides, the groom's family and the bride's family, and bride and groom were deaf. And we did it as a very similar way you do any wedding, but everything, of course, was signed, and that was very special to try to do that in sign language so they didn't have to look at an interpreter. But we did have interpreters available, one by the two ministers and then one out in the congregation so the congregation could see it. One of the things that was very special, and you were asking me about changes, is that in the new liturgy, we no longer have the father give the bride away as a piece of property, but the father simply escorts the bride in and then returns to his seat. And then at a certain point in the wedding, we ask the parents of both the bride and groom to stand, and we ask them if they will provide their blessing and their loving support. And in this particular wedding, all the parents were deaf, and they all did it in sign language, and the groom's parents did it simultaneously. They had obviously practiced it and memorized it, and it really was very beautiful. The bride and groom turns around and looks at each parent as it's done. And
I really like that. I think that's a beautiful expression of that relationship and also the family. What about the role of parents in this whole process? Have you had the experience sometimes of parents maybe wanting to live vicariously through through the bride and groom's wedding, that I didn't get to do this at my wedding, so we're going to do it at your wedding no matter what? Has that ever been an experience? And how do you deal with what about those parents who are watching this program whose children are going to be married this summer, this fall? What words of wisdom could you give to them about their role and their relationship in the wedding liturgy? Murray?
Oh, thanks.
You look like you were thinking that was. You got a daughter you're going to be bringing up someday to the aisle, and
yeah, it's hard to think that my job will be to take 2 steps back. That this is not only my daughter, but someone who's about to be married to that man. And my advice to parents is to let him go. And my advice to the couple is leave. Because, again, we are trying to become separate, though linked and joined. And I really like the lasso. I'm not sure I'll use it, but it's an important symbol of what we're all trying to do. And to try to see how we are related and tied back to some source. We're all trying to grow up. And I think that through the weddings I've been with more recently than in the past, I really help parents to let go.
And that's an important part of this process of helping we parents to let go and to let them, encourage them to be themselves in a new relationship. What about wedding vows? Jose Luis, there are these old traditional wedding vows. I take you to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poor. What do you find? Do couples want to use those old traditional vows, or do they want to write some new vows? What's been your experience?
I guess my experience has been, I guess most of them wanted to use the traditionals. It's the younger couples that maybe think that they can be more precise, I guess, or more
with it, huh?
eloquent, or just maybe express their own personal feelings in a different way. Yes.
And do you encourage that if they want to rewrite the vows? Would you encourage that?
Yes.
Mary, how about you? Do they have to follow certain vows if they come to you?
I would not be against it. There's no rule against it, but it would depend upon the couple, and I would want to talk to them about what the meaning of the vows are and why certain things are included. And, you know, if I felt like they were going to create vows that would be appropriate, then I probably would encourage them to do it. I've really not had anyone asked to do that, so that's just projection on my part. So.
Do you encourage congregational singing? I heard you talk about that.
Well, it depends upon the couple and the relationship to the congregation. If they're, you know, truly wanting to seek a worship service, or of course if it's on Sunday morning, then I would encourage the hymns. But if it's going to be a lot of people from out of town and very few of the local congregation, then that may not be something they're comfortable with.
I have to ask you guys before we close this program, what about if a couple came and said they want to be married outside the church building? Murray, would you go with them?
I mean, I've done it.
You've done that?
I would prefer not to, because the sense, again, of they're coming into and designating a sacred space, a place they can return to. And it's not that God's there, God's everywhere, but we set aside the sanctuary, and that's become our sacred space.
Another symbol.
Yes.
Yes. How about Mary? Would you go to Zilker, or would you go someplace with a couple they want to be married outside?
My answer would be almost the same as Murray's, that I prefer the church, but if that's something they just really, really want, then we'll do it there, yeah.
Jose Luis, you have the final word. What do you think?
I would go.
Whither thou goest, I will
Yes,
go.
I would go, yes.
And you'll be there to represent the community of faith.
That's right.
Really have enjoyed visiting with you all. Weddings are exciting. They're fun. They're interesting. It's a part of the ministry of the community of faith. And we thank all of you, our viewing audience, for participating with Austin Faith Dialogue and discussing this important part of our lives. I suppose we don't really have to have the wedding of the year, but what we do want to say in our wedding celebrations, wherever they might be, that God is with us and that we are making commitments to share the wonder and the beauty that God has given to us in the relationships of life. Thank you for being with us on Austin Faith Dialogue, and may the peace of God be with you all.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.